Okay, we will start this webinar now. Welcome to the webinar Wemos is organizing on our new website, COVID-19 response.org. A review of initiatives for global access to and finance for medical products against COVID-19. My name is Ella Weggen and I work for Wemos in the Access to Medicines team. Wemos is an international civil society organization advocating equal access to health for everyone in the world. Together with our partners, we propose and support solutions for the root causes of limited access to health services and protection against health threats. Currently, we have three main programs. We focus on achieving access to medicines and vaccines to all, availability of sufficient health personnel with proper working conditions, and adequate funding to enable quality healthcare. Since we were founded over 40 years ago by a group of Dutch medical students, we have acquired an international reputation for a rights-based and systemic approach to health. In this webinar, we have 1.5 hours. The first hour we will use to explain about the website and its initiatives. We will go deeper into several of them and will also give recommendations how they can be improved or better used. My colleague Marije will start with an explanation of the website and its principles. After that, my colleague Tom will talk you through COVAX and Team Europe. Following that, my colleague Marianne Meijer will talk about local production, where she will discuss mainly the mRNA hub and CTAP, but also briefly touch upon contract manufacturing and the TRIPS waiver. Lastly, but not least, my colleague Mariska Meurs from the financing team, Finance for Health team of Wemos will talk about the G20 Global Health Threats Fund and the Pandemic Treaty. The final half hour we will use for questions and discussion. During presentations, we will only have time for clarifying questions. So if you have them, please put them in the chat. If you have other questions or points for discussion, please raise your hand or put them in the chat as well, so I can give you the floor in the final half hour. Now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Marije.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marije Versteeg and I work in the Access to Medicines team at Wemos. We developed this website in response to the multitude of access initiatives and financing for access initiatives that emerged since the onset of the pandemic. And even for our teams who work full-time on access to medicines and financing for health, it was sometimes difficult to keep track of all the developments and to inform our positions on all the proposals and so-called solutions to improving access to vaccines. So we had a strong sense to not only make an overview of all these initiatives, but to also apply a critical lens in terms of the strengths and the weaknesses, and to what extent these initiatives can truly contribute to health equity, meaning vaccine equity and access to other treatments and diagnostics for everyone, everywhere. And especially also because we're now 2 years into the pandemic and there's talk of sufficient vaccines for everyone. And there's billions of rands that continue to be invested in local production capacity, but yet we see continued vaccine inequity across the globe. And with the new investments that are now promised and planned for local production capacity, we believe it's important that we collectively keep a good eye on how the public funds are being spent and whether these truly will benefit health equity. After all, at the beginning of the pandemic, there were lots of public investments as well into research and development of vaccines and other innovations. And we did not see the public return, or at least we did not see the public return for everyone equally. So our questions now, as we go into a new phase of the pandemic that is looking at structural solutions, the local production capacity, what kind of conditions will be attached to these billions of euros or dollars? And will those be in the public interest, those conditions? Hence, we developed this critical overview. It contains, I think some of you might have had the chance to look at the website already, but I will also make a small demonstration now. It contains short-term, medium-term, long-term solutions to achieving equity in access to various COVID-19 innovations. And it's really meant to be a helpful resource for anyone working for an effective and equitable response to this pandemic and future pandemics. And we hope it will be of help to you, but it's also work in progress. New initiatives will be added. It is not yet exhaustive. And we also welcome your critical questions and inputs, and we are committed to continuously improve and update the website. Just to be sure, when we refer at Wemos to health equity, we mean people and countries worldwide accessing affordable COVID-19 products based on need, not ability to pay, that are relevant for the local context in which people live and without facing financial hardship. And that is at a country level as well as at an individual level. And we used 5 principles to operationalize health equity. I'll just bring a slide to show you. These are the 5 principles that we have used to assess the different initiatives. And when I talk about different initiatives, I mentioned short and long term, but you can think of the mRNA hub, the TRIPS waiver, IDA private sector funding, the IDA 20 private sector window, CTAP, Team Europe's EU proposal, counter proposal to the TRIPS waiver. These are the very wide range of different responses that have emerged and been proposed to address access to medicines during COVID-19. Our first principle is sufficiency. At Wemos, we stand for equal and sufficient access for all. Equal access is not enough if everyone has too little. But sufficient access does also not guarantee equal access. We all know that there are claims of sufficient access, sufficient vaccines by mid-2020, an amount of 20 billion doses sometime during 2022. But will these also end up with the people and the countries needing them the most? Or will high-income countries with booster campaigns take up their unfair share of this total sum of vaccines entering the market? And also with sufficiency, we also look at whether an initiative is the most, we'll look at the extent to which an initiative can rapidly contribute to meeting the global needs. So for instance, a bilateral deal between an IP holder and a manufacturer may be of help, but it's not as far-reaching compared to a non-exclusive global licensing deal with the WHO COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, also known as CTAP. Urgency, the question is, to what extent could this initiative increase global access to COVID-19 innovations urgently? Of course, that is the first priority. We also believe in structural long-term solutions like the pandemic treaty. Wemos is very much supporting the long-term structural outlook, but the long-term plan should also not distract from the immediate priorities, which are right now. Sustainability. To what extent could this initiative improve resilience to future public health emergencies of international concern? So here we look at whether this initiative provides a structural solution addressing the underlying causes of inequity, like for instance, the mRNA hub, which we believe is such a solution. But also because investing in the mRNA hub is not only good for COVID-19 vaccine equity, but will also be able to meet other vaccine needs relevant for the local context in future. Then we have power balance. To what extent could this initiative contribute to the equal power relations between high-income countries and low-income countries, which we've seen has been at the core of vaccine equity that we still face today? For instance, COVAX has played a critical role in improving access, but it has also kept the current dependencies in place. And we've seen what such dependencies can do when critical goods are scarce. We've seen vaccine nationalism and hoarding leaving others behind. Finally, public first. To what extent does this initiative put public interest above commercial interests? Here we refer mostly to the principle of vaccines and other innovations as public goods. With the growing investments into partnerships for local production, we think it's an area that we should collectively scrutinize to ensure that indeed those public funds are conditioned to promote people's access over profits. Let us be clear, we very much believe in the importance of local production capacity expansion. We think it is part of the solution for equity. But we also believe that it's important to look at the conditions that come with the financing in these mostly public-private partnerships. Okay, so ultimately we believe that there's not one single initiative that is the silver bullet and that can provide the answer. It's really the combination of initiatives that together work on the short, medium, long term towards health equity, and that help shift the power from high-income countries to global equity, to low-income countries, and that initiatives that prioritize the worst off and put global public benefit first. This brings me to the next point, Wemos' work. Why did we select these initiatives and not maybe some others that are, this is not an exhaustive list, as I said, there's more happening globally. Well, as Wemos, we are based in the Netherlands, in the global north, and as part of our vision and mission, we believe it is part of our role to hold our own governments accountable to play their part in contributing and realizing health equity globally. So we've looked mostly at those initiatives where the Dutch government, European Union, and multilateral institutions spearheaded or initiated responses. And this does not mean that there are not many other initiatives that can and should also be analyzed. So yeah, I'm going to show you the website now. Let me see. I think, there we go. Here's the website. You can see it has a very basic structure. This is the homepage. The 5 principles here are explained, and then you go to the overview of the initiatives, not in any particular order. And it goes from mRNA hub all the way down to compulsory licensing, which is not really a new initiative, but we've added it because it's been used a lot as a possible solution to realizing vaccine equity. And you can click on any of these to read more. The pluses and the minuses on the homepage are a selection. They all have more pluses and minuses. Every initiative has strengths and weaknesses. Some clearly have more strengths and others less, and the same applies to weaknesses. There's some information on governance, funding, and then description of the initiative, and then here you can read about our analysis of strengths and weaknesses. Our analysis is informed by our own reading up and discussions with partner organizations and networks that we are part of, such as the People's Vaccine Alliance and the G2H2 Hub. And but ultimately, these are the positions of Wemos, but we welcome you to engage with us and provide a different perspective or an additional perspective. And it's one of the purposes of the website as well. Then if you go to, about this website, you can read a little bit more about the underlying foundation of the right to health that informs our work and our methodology of how we came about the analysis. And finally, for any feedback and questions, we welcome your response today, but also feel free to send us an email with your inputs. And I'm handing over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Marije. I will immediately go to my colleague Tom Buis. If he's ready, I will share the presentation.
Yes, please. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Buis, and I'm a global health advocate within the Access to Medicines team. And I will be taking you through 2 of the publications on our website. So 2 initiatives, the first one being COVAX and the second one being Team Europe. I think most of you are familiar with COVAX. And what COVAX basically is a procurement and distribution mechanism for COVID-19 vaccines. And it was set up in March 2020. And COVAX falls under the ACT-A umbrella and is governed by CEPI, Gavi, and WHO. But there's also an implementing partner that plays a key role in the delivery of vaccines in and to countries, and that's UNICEF. And as Wemos, we really believe that COVAX can provide a short-term relief, as it has the potential to quickly distribute vaccines that are then jointly procured. But unfortunately, it does not provide a structural solution, as it does not address the power imbalance between governments, between the global south and north. But it also doesn't address the power imbalance between governments in general and pharmaceutical companies. So the early targets for COVAX were actually pretty clear. COVAX stated that we should have a vaccination grade of at least 20% of the adult population in all countries. And that should be achieved by the end of 2021. And this percentage equals to about 2 billion vaccines being purchased and being distributed by COVAX. So this amount was an estimate of the vaccines needed for the most vulnerable population. So that includes, for instance, the elderly, people with comorbidities, but also healthcare workers in countries around the world. And this estimate of 2 billion vaccines is also based on some assumptions. So for instance, the assumptions that no boosters were required to maintain the high level of protection against the infection. What we have seen over the past few months is that, especially in high-income countries, governments have issued booster campaigns. So apparently that previous assumption that no booster was required to maintain a high level of protection against infection, that has proven to be false. Currently, COVAX has delivered around 1.3 billion vaccine doses, meaning that they have not yet reached their goal of 2 billion doses delivered by the end of 2021. So even though the goal in itself is low compared to the vaccination targets in high-income countries, the goal is still not met. And I think there's two main reasons why that target hasn't been met yet. The first one being the dependency on just a few producers of vaccines, and more specifically the Serum Institute in India. So especially during the earlier phase of COVAX, it was very much dependent on the Serum Institute of India. And the Serum Institute of India is a vaccine manufacturer that got a license from AstraZeneca. And the Serum Institute was expected to deliver a large percentage of the vaccines that were being distributed through COVAX. And this makes the actual delivery of the vaccines very prone to export restrictions. And this is unfortunately what happened in 2021 when India issued export restrictions for vaccines when the Delta variant hit India. And I think this example makes it perfectly clear that a diverse portfolio of vaccines for COVAX is necessary, and that also a good geographical spread of the vaccine producers is essential in lowering the risks for export restrictions. And that also a wider geographical spread of manufacturers would also improve countries' self-sufficiency. They wouldn't be just dependent on this one vaccine manufacturer in India. So what could have prevented this dependency on just a few producers is a global network of local manufacturing sites that are facilitated by technology transfer that would have really mitigated some of these risks. And I think that would mitigate not just the risks for COVAX, but also for other access initiatives that work on promoting access to COVID-19 technologies in general. The second reason why COVAX was, I think, unfortunately not able to meet its target for 2021 was that it was very much dependent on donations from high-income countries. and corporations from pharmaceutical companies selling the vaccines to COVAX. So initially, COVAX was set up to really work as a joint procurement initiative. But shortly after the rise of the pandemic, high-income countries and high-income regions have sought to make bilateral deals with preferential access over COVAX, meaning that the vaccines that would have been delivered with these deals would have been provided to these high-income countries first, putting COVAX at the back of the queue. So this happened over and over again, resulting in high-income countries providing boosters to the population, while especially low-income countries and also lower middle-income countries didn't even vaccinate 10% of their population yet. So in order to overcome both shortfalls for COVAX, I think it's important that a broader network of manufacturing capacity is set up that really is there to benefit the local population or the region where the vaccines are manufactured. So my colleague Marianne will go into more details on how this can be achieved and through which initiatives later on. So lastly, on COVAX, something that I haven't been able to provide more details on because also of time constraints, but as Wemos, we also think it's important that low and middle income countries are more included in the governance structure of COVAX, and that Marije also mentioned it already, that funding of COVAX should be based on the ability to pay, but also that the benefits are based on the needs of countries. So next slide, please, Ella, to Team Europe. So for Ella, could you please go to Team Europe, the Team Europe slide? So for Team Europe, this is a joint initiative that has been set up by EU member states in collaboration with the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. This initiative is mostly focused on achieving shorter-term goals, but has also included some language and funding towards more longer-term solutions. Their target is the same as the WHO with regards to achieving certain vaccination rates. And let me see. And in order to achieve this target of the 70% by mid-2022, Team Europe supports the sharing of vaccines through COVAX, and additionally, they provide also direct financial support for COVAX. So this resulted in €3 billion of funding to COVAX in total, and they also committed to the delivery of 500 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines. For these donations, we actually have the same critique as with COVAX, which probably doesn't come as a surprise. It's basically the same mechanism. It upholds the same power imbalance because of the dependency on the goodwill of Team Europe to actually donate these vaccines. But what actually differentiates Team Europe from COVAX with regard to more structural solutions is that Team Europe has reserved €1 billion to support local manufacturing capacity in Africa. And as Wemos, we are supportive of initiatives that lead to increased self-sufficiency for low and middle income countries. But it's very difficult to assess how Team Europe will actually achieve this increased local manufacturing capacity. We are also a bit hesitant because the EU has not been supportive as a whole for initiatives that would accelerate local manufacturing capacity by, for instance, pooling intellectual property and facilitating technology transfer from established producers of COVID-19 vaccines to new ones. So in order to judge whether the impact of Team Europe's efforts to increase local manufacturing capacity is really for the benefit of the population of the African region, that remains to be seen and is very much dependent on the details that still have to be published. And as Wemos, we really recommend that any funding that will go to private or public institutions that will then make sure that the local manufacturing capacity is increased should come with strings attached. So for us, the conditioning of this funding should really promote regional access, but it should also promote affordability and also the transparency of prices and R&D costs, but transparency in general, but more specifically the prices and R&D costs. And on more initiatives that promote promote the local manufacturing capacity, that is exactly what my colleague Marianne Meijer will now take you through. So Marianne, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Marianne Meijer. I work as Global Health Advocate in Wemos' Access to Medicines team, and today I will talk you through initiatives related to local production. So stressed by my colleagues before, we advocate at Wemos for structural solutions that address the power imbalance in access to medical products that put people's health first. In our view, local production and technology transfer both play a critical role in working towards this goal. And that is why my focus of today is on initiatives related to these topics. So first, I'll explain why they're crucial, whereafter I discuss two initiatives we consider potential game changers for low and middle income countries and thus for the world. Currently, many low and middle income countries have to import lifeguarding health products from other countries. As such, they heavily rely on those others. The African continent, for example, all vaccines administered on the continent, of all of them is 99% imported. And we all know that this is also the continent of which many countries have been pushed to the back of the line to get hold of COVAX vaccines. So these matters have resulted in the region holding the lowest vaccination rate globally, where around 11% of the population is vaccinated, whilst in higher income countries, we are talking second booster shots and seek to inoculate young children. So due to facts like these, we'll witness how the inequality gap is growing quite rapidly and how the donation-based approach does not seem to be a sufficient remedy in curbing the tide. Initiatives that might ignite change in this regard aim to ensure that countries with poorer access to medical products will be enabled to produce those products themselves within their own borders and regions. And that can be achieved by deploying local production facilities. There are various paths through which local production, meaning regional production and collaborative efforts, in our understanding, can be boosted. And that can result in a greater diversity of manufacturers. And this is not merely relevant in the context of the current pandemic, but also for future international health crises. So we see 4 options to enhance local production. The first one is through bilateral contracts. This means that the innovator of a product agrees with another company that the last one mentioned will produce the innovator's product, or at least a part of it. And many sub-licensing deals like this have been concluded already. But the problem is clear, the vaccines do not get where they are needed the most. The second option is pooling mechanisms. So we talk about platforms with which innovators can share their information, such as the Medicines Patent Pool and CTAP. I'll discuss this later, and the same goes for the independent research and development, our third point, which means that local organizations that did not invent a certain product try to produce it through reverse engineering. This is possible in the mRNA technology transfer hub, which I'll also talk about later. And the fourth option is, I think you know it, it's the TRIPS waiver, and it's a proposal from India and South Africa currently being negotiated at the WTO to allow countries to not grant or enforce certain intellectual property rights related to the COVID-19 pandemic during the pandemic. So to make it easier for local companies to start a production line of a patented product without the concern about possible legal repercussion. Next slide, please. Local production capacity goes hand in hand with technology transfer, and especially when it concerns newer complex products. And some of the just mentioned ways include this transfer. And what do I mean with this transfer? I mean the procedure that controls transfer of any process together with its documentation, like regulatory data, clinical trial data, and so on. And it can be accompanied with direct hands-on professional expertise. Thus, technology transfer may take place in the innovator and one or more potential manufacturers, but also between various manufacturing sites amongst themselves. And it's important to mention that MSF recently published a research identifying over 100 firms that have the potential to actually produce mRNA vaccines. So such technology transfer can lead to a higher global supply of a product and reduce dependencies to a low number of suppliers by diversifying production at the regional level. And two of the initiatives that intend to do this, the WHO mRNA Technology Transfer Hub and CTAP, will now be addressed by me. And short disclaimer, of course, no initiative is fully perfect. Let me start at the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub. This has been launched in June 2021 by the WHO, the Medicines Patent Pool, and a South African consortium. And it is a result of the COVAX manufacturing task force and has the objective to establish permanent COVID-19 production capacity in low and middle income countries. And if it all works out according to plan, those countries do not longer have to fully depend on other countries and companies to get access to vaccines. So this objective ought to be reached by utilizing the hubs and spokes model. The hubs are the technology transfer centers that deliver technology packages to different spokes where the information will be used to set up new production lines. And the first hub is located in South Africa, based at Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines. What they do is they will conduct technology transfer to spokes, which are recently announced to be located in Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. And those spokes can on their turn use the received information to produce the vaccines and distribute them over the region. So the hub in South Africa has made use of information available within the public domain and managed to discover a formula for an mRNA vaccine through reverse engineering efforts related to the Moderna vaccine. Now they will run clinical trials, then they go through the regulatory phase, and finally they expect to have the first vaccines marketed by the end of 2024. This will be more than just a copy. In fact, it will be their own vaccine. And that is because the formula has been found without any assistance of Moderna nor Pfizer, as they refused to transfer their technology. As a result, the hub model takes a longer route, but it brings them a considerably higher level of self-reliance. However, if Moderna and Pfizer did provide assistance, the hub would have already been able to produce. There is a chance, I must mention that there is a chance that what the hub does breaches intellectual property rights of innovators. They can infringe them by what they do. However, Moderna publicly announced that they do not intend to enforce their patents when they suspect any breaches during the pandemic. This is not a guarantee, but it is for me the reason not to dive into this any longer. And after the pandemic, it is also expected that the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub can be used to share technology about the production of other vaccines than those against the coronavirus. Examples are vaccines against Zika, cancer, HIV, and TB. And this means that the initiative can form a real structural solution. Next slide, please. Then I discuss the second initiative I will talk about today. This is the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. We call it CTAP. It is a platform launched by the WHO with the support of the Medicines Patent Pool, Open COVID Pledge, the UN Technology Bank, and UNITAID. And quite early in the pandemic already, they established this platform aspiring to facilitate production expansion. They did this because, as per their prediction, the then to be innovative products against COVID-19 would be scarce, or at least at the beginning. And any organization like a research center, a pharmaceutical company, or whatever can share their know-how and technology through CTAP with qualified manufacturers around the world. The objective of this is that they conclude non-exclusive deals so that no regions are ruled out. In return for knowledge disseminating efforts, the sharer will get compensated fairly. And CTAP can help increasing the global supply of a product, and it can decrease dependencies. That is why we consider this initiative very promising, also for the future. Nonetheless, its success relies upon the willingness of pharmaceutical companies to disclose their information beyond their usual partners. That is because it is a voluntary mechanism, so of course no one is under any compulsion to share anything with them. Thus far, we can say that 43 WHO member states have supported CTAP, and some of them contributed financially too. And examples of countries that did this are Belgium and Spain. And only one organization thus far has shared its know-how and technology through the platform. As such, we clearly see that CTAP has great potential in terms of equity and self-reliance, but it is not living up to its potential yet. We think that CTAP would be more efficacious if the CTAP Secretariat has a clearer strategy and more financial power. Besides that, we believe that national governments can do more to advance equal access to health-related products. For instance, by attaching conditions to public investments in life-saving products. These conditions can include incentives to disseminate know-how and technology beyond typical partner companies so that they can help meet global demand and increase the self-determination of low and middle-income countries. Now, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Mariska Meurs, to talk you through the G20 Global Health Threats Fund and the Pandemic Treaty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne. And can we see the next slide, please? Thanks. So I will be, my name is Mariska Meurs and I work at the Finance for Health team in Wemos. I will be talking you through our assessments of the Global Health Threats Fund and the Pandemic Treaty, which are both geared towards the longer term and trying to offer a response to the future pandemic threats. First, to start with the Global Health Threats Fund. Well, as we all know, the financial response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been clearly inadequate. The existing financing mechanisms were too slow to respond, did not offer sufficient funding, and overall preparedness has been underfunded for many years. As a reaction, several proposals have been made to improve and increase funding for future pandemic preparedness and response. And this proposal by the G20 is one of them. So this proposal for a Global Health Threats Fund is one of the core elements of a report that was issued last year in June by the G20 high-level independent panel on financing the global commons for pandemic preparedness and response. Other proposals for improved funding were made by the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, and also by the Pandemic Preparedness Partnership. And the reason that we've chosen to look more in detail at this G20 proposal is because of the G20's overall influence on global level decision-making. So how do we assess that this G20 proposal meets the need for change? We've looked specifically at aspects of equity, of governance, and of funding for medical products, as that is the focus of our website and of our expertise. But of course, we also welcome perspectives from other angles, maybe from the participants. Some of the key characteristics first of this proposal. It calls for a sizable increase and improved predictability of funding. The panel assesses that in total, $75 billion is needed over the next 5 years for investments in global goods, for prevention and preparedness. And the target for this fund is to pool 2/3 of this amount. So by raising $10 billion per year for a period of 5 years, to enable agile deployment to meet the most critical priorities, as they say. And the other third of the $75 billion is to go directly into strengthening existing institutions such as the World Health Organization and the multilateral development banks. These contributions to be made to the fund are expected to be kickstarted by the G20 countries, then to be complemented by philanthropies and gradually to be added on with contributions from other countries through a assessed contribution scheme and also based on the ability to pay. What would it be used for? The investments that the fund would be allocated to are in the area of supporting a number of global actions, including a stronger global network for surveillance, stronger grant financing for country and regional investments in global public goods, and enhanced and reliable funding for public-private partnerships for the supply of medical countermeasures. For the funding of early response, the so-called surge funding at the outbreak of a pandemic, or to prevent an outbreak of a pandemic, the panel proposes to rely on World Bank capacity, but it does not completely exclude a role also in this type of early financing. The governance of this fund would be in the hands of an investment committee, which would be constituted under a global health threats board. And this board is also one of the elements of the G20 proposal. It would be anchored in the G20 to be complemented by other countries, but it foresees only a rotating representation of, as they say, countries that are more vulnerable to infectious disease outbreaks with pandemic potential. So basically the governance would be in the hands primarily of those who contribute most financially, which is also one of our points of criticism of this proposal, and hence one of our recommendations listed here. We believe that the decision-making on allocation of these funds must be democratic with equal representation by low-income countries. Because what we've seen from the current experience is that we cannot rely on the G20 countries to take decisions that are not directly in their own interests or in their industry's interests. Now, the second recommendation relates to the conditions on benefit sharing. The overall report does contain some strong text on the need for contractual clauses in public-private partnerships to ensure affordable prices, transparency, sharing intellectual property, technology transfer, but these are not mentioned explicitly in relation to the funding from this Global Health Threats Fund. And again, based on the experience in the current pandemic, we think it's very important that these conditions are made very explicit. So we recommend for the fund support to public-private partnerships to really emphasize the need for public investments. Let me go back to my notes. It says that the fund support to public-private partnerships, as it is now in the proposal, emphasizes the need for public investment to share risks and to enable private investments. But we strongly recommend that this global funding mechanism puts in place very clear conditions to guarantee benefit sharing. So our assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of this proposal are summarized here in the table. So yes, it makes a clear and a strong case for increased and sustainable funding based on pre-agreed contributions, based on ability to pay, and also it calls for this funding to be additional to current ODA and to be additional to current investments in health system strengthening. But on the weakness side, the governance is skewed towards the largest financial contributors. There is an absence of clear conditions for public funding to PPPs, and overall, there is scant attention to more structural solutions to an increase of public resources. So we have a concern that this call for funding to be additional will not materialize. And we think there is a need for more structural measures to strengthen public resource envelopes overall. Some mention is made in the report about debt service relief, on strengthening national level tax collection measures, but it's quiet overall on, for instance, more structural debt solutions, debt cancellation, or of global level measures needed to improve tax justice, for instance. Now, what we see is the unwillingness of high-income countries to act on current structural barriers for more equal distribution of resources is also what tempers a bit our expectations of the pandemic treaty that is now starting to be negotiated at the WHO. So if we can move to the next slide, I will also talk you through our assessment of the pandemic treaty. One back, please. Yes, there it is. Thank you. So to give you a very short background, last year, the members of the World Health Organization decided on a two-track process. On the one hand, to strengthen what's already there, the revised international health regulations. These have been revised in 2005 and are in effect since 2007, but have been plagued with many implementation problems, as well as some design flaws, according to some, which are also going to be repaired. But they decided to simultaneously start negotiating a new WHO convention, agreement, or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And this last instrument has come to be known as the Pandemic Treaty. An intergovernmental negotiating body has been established for this process, and it had its first meeting last week and will have its second meeting in July this year. At that meeting in July, the INB will consider a working draft document for the instrument and also identify the provision of the WHO constitution under which the instrument shall be adopted. And this means that also in July, the members will decide whether this instrument will be legally binding. So between now and July, there will be a process of member state meetings, public hearings to draft this first working draft of the instrument. And only then the real text negotiations will start. And this is going to be a lengthy process. The INB's final report will be on the agenda of the 77th World Health Assembly, which is in May 2024. So what do we expect from this new instrument? Again, we are now looking at it mostly from a perspective of equal access to medical products, but also touching upon some of the broader context. And I would like to start by pointing out that it's kind of hard to assess something that's not yet there. So our assessment focuses mostly on what we consider to be the desirable elements of such an instrument, but also on the risks that are involved in spending time and resources on a process with quite an uncertain outcome. While, as my colleagues have already demonstrated before, there's urgent action needed on many counts right now. So indeed, on the process, it's long. We don't yet know what it will cover, and we don't yet know whether this will result in a legally binding instrument. And if it does, we don't know how many national parliaments will actually ratify the instrument. And this is important because it means that attention, time, and resources will be distracted from other action that's needed right now, for instance, on the sharing of knowledge, on the transfer of technology, on funding for preparedness and response, and also on strengthening health systems, which is very urgently needed. Now, looking at the substantive elements, what we would like to see when this treaty becomes a reality is to include provisions to commit to generous and predictable funding, public financing for research and development, but ensuring that the resulting know-how is open sourced and that the resulting products are fairly priced. So to ensure that the knowledge produced with public financing is not monopolized, but indeed becomes a public good to mandate technology transfer, sharing of IP, data, and knowledge needed for the production and supply of products. Also to enhance funding and support for vaccine production in regions of the world that are underserved, to contribute to strengthening WHO's capacity to manage pandemics, and in general to contain provisions that effectively advance the public interest in terms of the right to health over commercial interests of healthcare industries. And for this, they could take inspiration, for example, in Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Also, that any funding mechanisms that are set up for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response be governed democratically and transparently, and be funded with predictable contributions based on ability to pay and allocations based on needs. So this is our assessment right now. We are continuing to exchange with our civil society networks, including the Geneva Global Health Hub, with policymakers, and welcome all suggestions on this assessment and our recommendations. New developments, new information continues to come in. So we've summarized here the strengths and weaknesses. So yes, the pandemic treaty offers an opportunity to set things right. But in light of the weaknesses that I've already mentioned, we really need to keep attention focused on other opportunities for change. So while we advocate for this new instrument to include certain provisions, we really want to highlight to policymakers that action on many fronts cannot wait for this instrument to be negotiated, approved, and ratified. So far, our take on the pandemic treaty, and I would like to hand over to my colleague Ella for moderating any possible questions or discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariska. We have quite some questions for you in the chat, so I would like you to stay present immediately, because some of them are clarifying questions, but some of them you might need to give more details about. The first one was actually Remco van Leeuwen said that the slide indicates the slide on the G20 Global Health Threats Fund indicates a target of 10 million per year. And he was wondering if it shouldn't be 10 billion. And some of the colleagues already answered in the chat, but maybe you want to also reply to that to make sure what is the right answer.
That should be 10 billion. I'm so sorry. I thought I checked all the facts.
No, but it's good to know, and also good to speak in the session. Okay, then the second one is by Dr. Marianne. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. It's more of a clarifying question, I would say. She asks if Africa CDC is involved in this program by the G20.
Good question, and to be honest, I don't know. So I'm going to note down. I welcome all the questions and also to sharpen our further knowledge, and I'll would be glad to come back to that later.
Okay, and then two questions about the pandemic treaty. Marianne Fernandez, which is Luis, I believe, from Innovarte, asking what information we need to ask government to support the negotiations for the pandemic treaty.
Okay, let me think. What information we need to ask governments to support the negotiations? As I mentioned, we've developed a number of recommendations now, like the kind of substantive elements that we would like to see, and this is very much evolving around making sure that public investments also lead to public benefits. And I think this is an important omission in the current setup. And yeah, so these things continuously evolve, and I think it's hard to mention like 2 or 3 things to ask at this moment, but at least this is an essential one. And I would also like, in order to answer that, to point back to the slide with recommendations, which is our assessment right now of the things that we find important to see back in the treaty.
Okay, thank you. Another question by Dr. Marianne. She asks, could you please define democratically governed in the context of the pandemic treaty?
Yes, as we saw with the G20 proposal, for instance, this one is going to be this Global Health Threats Board and the Global Health Threats Fund are foreseen to be anchored under the G20, which means that those countries that have the highest financial measures are going to have more say in the setup and in the allocations of resources. And we want to prevent that with any setups under a pandemic treaty that's going to be negotiated. So one country, one vote would mean for me that it's democratically governed.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we have a question by Rosalind McKenna. She says it's an incredible useful analysis and she would love to hear more on how we are taking this into discussions with national governments defining these mechanisms. So it's not only a question to you, Mariska, one of the other colleagues can answer it as well. But maybe you would like to start?
Since I'm having the floor, I'll give a short
answer.
Yeah,
I can try and take this one. Yeah, as for Wemos, we're based in the Netherlands, so all of these principles that Marije has explained about in the beginning, these are the principles that we also would like to see incorporated in the different mechanisms. And again, as Marije also explained in the beginning, we don't see that there's one silver bullet for one initiative that should be the initiative that all the governments should focus on. There's multiple initiatives that could play a role in different timing. So we have the short-term initiatives looking for short-term relief. We have the mid to medium long-term solutions. But I think what is guiding for us are these principles, and that these are incorporated and stimulated by national governments. So for instance, what we try and achieve is that the Dutch government is more supportive of local manufacturing capacity in low and middle income countries, and not just setting up a donation scheme. So that is something that we're trying here in the Netherlands.
If I may add on to that, is the manner in which we also do that is through direct engagement with policymakers in the different ministries. We've co-organized a roundtable where we presented our position to the different government ministries, and the pharmaceutical industry was also represented there, as well as civil society. And the Access to Medicines team also have ongoing engagement with parliamentarians in the Dutch government. And then at the European level, we also part of the CIFA program, where we work not only at the European level, but let's say high income country level. We collaborate with our partners that are based in different countries that are doing similar work in with their own governments.
Yes, I would like to add on that. On EU level, we work within the EU Alliance on R&D and affordable medicines. And on global level, we work with other organizations. So we hope also to reach out to other NGOs that can make use of the principles that we use in our assessments. So yeah, and in direct engagement with people from WHO, of course, we hope that this provides input for their policy. Then I see one more question by Marie-Christine Siemerink. Thank you very much. Very relevant and timely presentation. What is your take on CEPI regarding technology and knowledge sharing? Is it part of conditions for developers for receiving funds? Does any of you, my colleagues, would like to answer?
Yeah, I can try and answer this one first, because CEPI is unfortunately not in the list of initiatives that we have analyzed. As Wemos, we have worked previously on attaching conditionalities in the Dutch context of public funding. And I think a lot of the conditions that we favored in the Dutch context also apply to the conditions that that CEPI, for instance, gives out. So the three basic principles that we think should be based around the conditions that should be attached is promoting affordability, availability, and transparency. So those should be the core principles of the conditionalities attached. And I'm not aware of any conditions that CEPI has on the receiving end of the funds, but again, I'm also not 100% sure because we didn't analyze CEPI's policies.
Thank you very much. This might be something we can look into as Wemos later as well. So it's a good question. Thank you for that. Then again from Marianne, which is, I believe, still Luis. From your experience, what principles seems more easy to get support from government and industry? I think this still refers to the pandemic treaty. Am I right, Luis? Let me see if I can ask you to ask this question.
Yes. Well, I mean, in general, we are thinking on some principles that should inform all the initiatives, and not only the pandemic treaty, and I will think that some of those principles are more difficult to sell to governments and industry. And I was wondering what has been your experience discussing these principles with the different agencies, and to see what are we can expect that will be easier to accept, and which other we need to work more.
Is there any of my colleagues who want to answer this? Marije, I see your hand.
Yeah, I can make one input. I think the sufficiency principle is one that I think pharmaceutical companies are quite keen to contribute to produce as much vaccines that can be sold. But our point is that I don't think any of the principles can be seen as a standalone. We need to see them in combination of the collective, although not every principle weighs as heavy for every initiative. That is what our review on the website kind of unpacks. But so the sufficiency principle, to have enough vaccines for everyone, I think that is something that most stakeholders want to contribute to. But the distribution of this projection of 20 billion doses available by mid 2022, it makes it seem to governments that there are sufficient vaccines and that there's no need for technology transfer. But the problem is that the distribution of those vaccines do not go to the countries and the regions where people need them the most, and this system maintains a dependency on others deciding where the vaccines go. And hence our push for technology transfer, so that low middle income countries do not have to depend on the willingness of manufacturers and governments to distribute equitably. So
Okay, thank you very much, Marije. I see a response in the chat by Mr. Charles Clift. Another initiative not covered is the 100 days mission to provide vaccines, diagnostics and therapeutics within 100 days of an outbreak, recommended by G7, but CEPI is a key actor. Thank you very much for this addition. We will definitely keep it in mind whether we should include it on the website as well. And I see a comment by Jan Schofield. In the case of technology transfer to countries that are spokes of the South African hub, where will the technology be coming from? For example, is the expectation that a pharmaceutical company that has developed a vaccine will offer its technology to the hub? And if so, on what terms? Marianne, is this a question that you could answer?
Yeah, but I think Marije is maybe better at explaining it, but otherwise I can do it.
I can try as well. I think what is happening now at the hub is that they are developing basically like a copy of the Moderna vaccine, and the technology they have developed in the South African hub will then be transferred to the spokes in the other countries. But this process will, of course, be much faster if companies like Moderna or Pfizer actually actively transfer their technology to the hub in South Africa, which then can spread it again through the spokes, like you mentioned. So at this moment, it's their own technology that they will distribute, and I'm not yet sure on what terms this will exactly happen. I think there's relatively little information available on how this will exactly take place.
Thank you very much. Then there's a comment by Thomas Schwartz. He says that democratic governance and legitimacy of treaty could benefit a lot from opening up treaty-making process to civil society. See the making of the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, not yet achieved by the INB. Then the next question, I don't know, Mariska, if you want to respond to that, or if I should, it's more of a comment than a question.
I only want to agree. Thank you, Thomas, for that comment.
Then Dr. Marianne to everyone says it's also very important not to make other African countries dependent on South Africa either. Create a different but similar problem. How about the hoarding and refusal to sell? Moderna is talking with the South African companies and BioNTech with Senegal and the other. Is there one of my colleagues who wants to respond to this?
Yeah, I think I can. It's an issue that we are looking into at Wemos, that the current system of medical innovation and manufacturing and distribution is not fair. And if we reproduce the system anywhere elsewhere in the world, it may still not be fair. So it's I think that is where your point is coming from, to not make other African countries dependent on South Africa either. And but the good news is that there are lots of initiatives now across the African continent in different regions that are all looking at vaccine production. The question that we have is whether there is any coordination between those different initiatives to ensure that the whole portfolio of vaccines that will be produced on the African continent will complement one another, instead of maybe all producing the same vaccines. So that might well be happening, that coordination, but we're not sure of it, and it is something that we would like to look into. And how about the hoarding and refusal to sell? Yeah, at Wemos we are starting a research project that is looking at these kind of questions, and we also look for partner organizations with an interest in these questions that to get in touch with us and yeah, share their thoughts and expertise as we go about investigating these kind of questions.
I was wondering if you would like to respond to that question, Dr. Mary. Yeah, because I think you are already replying in the chat. It might be easier to do it by speaking to us.
Sorry, which question are you, Dr. Marianne, which question did you say? Are you talking about? Yeah,
I would like to ask if you have an answer or a response to what my colleague just said about the fact that we're looking into it, and that we're curious to hear how you think this should happen.
Yes, you did mention that hopefully there is a system in place that will actually coordinate the different sites of manufacturing or technology transfer, etc. And basically my response was that is what Africa CDC is supposed to be doing. And my understanding that they are in the process of putting that in place. However, the main concern was that we should not duplicate the same problem by focusing everything within South Africa. And because then that would just make the other countries become dependent then on South Africa. Although I'm aware that BioNTech are indeed speaking to Nigeria, Senegal, and I think Tunisia. I think Egypt as well. The North African countries. BioNTech is doing that, and yes, they're still trying to discuss how to transfer technology there, or would it be better to just transfer some prefab factories there? and then just fill in the product and distribute the product. And that is a situation that is not very, it's not very popular, because what the objective, well, for me, the objective is really to make the low-income countries become more independent, less dependent, basically, on European countries or rich countries, so to speak, because that is really where the problem is, in the sense that some countries did ask to actually buy vaccines from the manufacturers, and they were not able to. They were refused because the vaccines, the doses had already been reserved for rich countries. And unfortunately, up until now, although everything is going very well in Europe and maybe in other rich countries in Asia, in Africa, we're not even at the 30% yet.
Yes. Well, I was wondering, I can imagine that the terms on which the mRNA hubs is functioning to distribute to other countries in Africa are completely different than the distribution of new companies in that Moderna is thinking about might be, so that it might be more beneficial for other countries as well to work with the South African mRNA hub.
I mean, they are, and I also know that the UK is also working on an mRNA technology in Uganda. That is definitely for sure. And but no, I mean, we have to accept that these are politically completely different countries, and a lot of them have different systems. That's why I wondered if you could actually define what you mean by democratically governed. That is a very political word.
Yes.
Basically, but then later on, I think someone explained that by that you mean the transparency and accountability, and perhaps it would be better to use those words than to use a political word like democratically, because it is a political word basically, and Africa has its own issues on those lines.
Very useful. We will take it with us. Thank you very much. I will continue to the next remark, great by Remco van Leeuwen. Great presentation and explanation of the G20 fund, the quick scan, how that HIV, AIDS and TB are barely mentioned in the plans for the fund. To me, it would make a lot of sense to create close links to the exciting programs such as the Global Fund and build on the capacity that has already been built through these programs. What is your view on this? Can you discuss this a bit more? Remco van Leeuwen from the AIDS Fonds. Mariska?
Yes, thanks for that question. It's a good question. I have not looked into this aspect. Agree with you that it's important, and I think all the proposals for future funding of pandemic preparedness and response touch upon this rather superficially. All say that it's important to link with existing institutions, but they don't give a lot of detail. I know the Friends of the Global Fund Japan has issued an issues brief comparing 3 funding proposals on how they propose to interact with the Global Fund, and I'm trying to find the link to that document to you. So it's not an aspect that we have really analyzed, but I'll share the resource.
Okay, thank you very much, Mariska. I see Breda Gahan responding to the discussion we had earlier. Yes, CDC coordinating with the Ministry of Health in country, UNICEF and WHO across the continent. I think these are very useful recommendations for us. And then Oscar Lanza is saying, I agree that it is important and key to include HIV, AIDS and TB in the mentioned plans. Is there any of my colleagues who still want to respond to that? Then I don't see any further questions. Are there any members or any attendees that would like to say something? Please. Oh, I see my colleague. Marije, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ella. And there was more comment at the beginning of the chat around the principles. That the principles do not all correspond to the analysis. I think, let me see where I saw it. helpful set of principles indeed. However, I do not see them fully implemented on the website in the plus-minus assessment of strengths and weaknesses of the featured initiatives, but thanks for this synopsis. I think we've hesitated whether we should do the review per principle and then unpack it, make it more explicit. But when we decided not to, we decided to make a general review with strengths and weaknesses, but from the lens of those 5 principles. And not every principle is as applicable to each initiative, like the issue of urgency. Yeah, I mean, it scores high for COVAX, it scores low for pandemic treaty maybe, but pandemic treaty is still very important. It could be very important. You can't, let's say, penalize pandemic treaty for not finding an answer right now. It's just that it should be part of a set of initiatives together with other initiatives that deal with the immediate urgency. So that is kind of how we looked at it. And if you go to the website, then there is, after you go to the strengths and weaknesses, there's a critical review where those principles are coming back in the analysis of the initiative. You're on mute, Ella.
Let me see, are there any other questions? Please raise your hand or put them in the chat. We still have some minutes left, but if there are no further questions, then I would suggest, I would like to ask my colleagues whether they have any final remarks following the discussions that we have, or whether we can close the session.
Okay, I can start. Thank you, Ella. Thanks everyone for your participation and your questions, your critical questions and comments. And I've noted down CEPI is one of the new initiatives to add on to the website. And we also want to work on Act A, diagnostics and therapeutics. And we just want to invite you and encourage you to email us if there are particular gaps in terms of initiatives that should be on the website, or any other questions or information that you would like us to engage with. But certainly then the CEPI one, I think, and the Act A are next in line.
Great. Well, we have an email address opened up especially for this, for comments, questions, remarks, suggestions for our website, COVID-19 response@wemos.nl. So please reach out to us if you have any questions or suggestions. And yeah, I would like to thank all the panel members, and I would like to ask everyone, do not hesitate if you want to get in contact with us. We are very open, as mentioned before by my colleagues. We would like to hear from you what you think can be done better, what you think should be added on the website. And yeah, with that, I would like to close this panel session and would like to thank you very much and wish you all a very good afternoon or morning or evening. Bye-bye.